Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next in our series of interviews. How can we restore trust in our Minnesota institutions? The title of tonight's conversation is Can Minnesota Stay Generous While Not Being Robbed Blind? And we have the perfect guest to discuss this topic with us today. We're very pleased to have with us Judy Randall, who is the Legislative Auditor, has served in that capacity for over 4 years, but had a distinguished career in that office for a long time as well, serving with former Legislative Auditor Jim Nobles. Judy brings a career that started on Wall Street in the nonprofit sector and has dedicated her life to public service. And we really appreciate, Judy, you being with us tonight. I also want to let all of you know that we have a very good panel tonight who will be asking questions of Judy. We'll start with our young panelists. Chloe Zhao is the captain of the Minnetonka Congress team, who just successfully had a great season that just finished recently. Chloe is a senior at Minnetonka High School. Chloe, welcome. Helen Baer is an instructional analyst at St. Thomas University and is also a board member for the Civic Caucus. Helen is the second of our future leaders, although some might say she already is a leader, as is Chloe. So we are also joined tonight by Lee Munnich. Lee is a professor emeritus from the Humphrey School of Public Policy, a former Minneapolis council member, public policy expert in many areas, especially in terms of transportation and local government policy. And Lee, it's great to have you here too. And then rounding out our policy discussion tonight in our interview panel is Ted Kolderie. Ted was the founding president of the Citizens League and is a renowned leader in our state on issues of public policy, government reform, and in particular on education. And so it's a real honor to have you with us as well tonight, Ted. So thank you all, and we'll jump into your questions in a moment. I will be serving as moderator tonight. And Judy, I'd like to start with a bit of a question that's fairly broad and give you a few moments to respond. The legislative auditor is a position, of course, that was created 50 years ago or more with the leadership of former Congressman Martin Sabo in the state legislature. It's taken a lot of turns over the years, but plays a very important role in government, but not necessarily always a high-profile role. So I would love to have you start off our conversation by talking about how you see the role of that office and how you feel that office can strengthen trust people have in the implementation of government programs. I know that's a really broad question, but just maybe give you a chance to tee things off tonight, and then we'll jump into questions.
Great. Thanks, Paul, and thanks for having me on tonight. I'm honored to be here. So I'm looking forward to a good conversation. I think it's always helpful just to back up a little and just kind of say who we are and where we fit in state government, because I think it's not well known and it's a unique place. So the Office of the Legislative Auditor, OLA, is a nonpartisan, independent office in the legislative branch. So nonpartisan, independent, legislative, and each of those words has a meaning and is important. So nonpartisan, we really and truly are a nonpartisan office, and that has been something that I think is increasingly unique in state government and in the voices that are heard around the Capitol and elsewhere. And so I think that is one area that I'll come back to when I talk about the importance of OLA and where I think we fit and how I think we can help build trust or continue trust in institutions. I'd like to think that there is still trust in institutions. Independent. the work that we produce is our work and our work alone. Legislators do ask us to do some of the reports we do. They do direct us to do some of the reports we do, but they do not approve our reports. They do not review them before they are released. They are 100% the work of our office. We have a very rigorous independent review verification process internally, and we stand by the work we do. And I have had experiences where legislators have asked us to do a report because they were certain we were going to come out saying one thing, and we did the work and we said something else. And that's because that's where the data and the information took us, because we're independent and we're nonpartisan. And then finally, legislative branch. So we are located in the legislature, in the legislative branch. We are overseen by a bipartisan, bicameral commission. So we have 3 members from each caucus. So 3 DFL representatives, 3 Republican representatives. Same deal on the Senate side. They kind of oversee the office. They appoint the legislative auditor. They select some of the topics that we evaluate. But by being in the legislative branch, that means we are independent from the pressures that may face folks in the executive branch or the judicial branch or other aspects of government. So we can go in and audit, other folks. Really anybody that receives state money is within our jurisdiction, but we can go into the executive branch and again do what needs to be done, look at the data, say what needs to be said, and not be worried about repercussions, because we are not in that branch. We report back to the audit commission kind of, but we are independent. Okay, so that's just a big overview, and I know I took up a lot of airspace by talking about that, but I think it's important. And then in terms of how we fit in terms of strengthening institutions, you said it's often a low profile office. I would love to be a lot lower profile than we've been lately, honestly, because we're not interested in the attention on the office. What we're interested in is good government and government programs working well. And so what our role is to go in, have a unique and independent look at how things are working, and then report it back to the agencies so that they can make improvements that are needed, report it back to the legislature so they can see if the policies they've implemented are achieving what they hope to achieve, and report it back to the public to provide transparency and then accountability, right? By having those reports be available to anybody, they're on our website, then voters can use it to ask questions and to hold both legislators accountable and executive branch accountable. So there's really a lot of different ways where I think we can play an important role in strengthening institutions in government. Hopefully that answered the question.
That's very much. Thank you, Judy. And Chloe, I this is likely new to you, because my guess is, and Judy would probably agree, that the vast majority of folks in the state haven't maybe heard of the Legislative Auditor's Office, and maybe that included you before this interview. But hearing Judy speak and some of the conversations you have among your friends about government and trust, do you have a question you'd like to ask Judy about her work?
Yeah, you'd be right. This is my first time hearing about the OLA, but to do my job as kind of like the youth panelist here, I know that within Minnesota especially, fraud has become a very popular and public issue. But I also know that my peers and I think we often aren't on the news as much, or we aren't, I guess I tend to get a lot of my news from social media, and I know that's true of a lot of youth out there, even though I know it's not the most reliable source. So my question is, where should we be finding trustworthy information? I know sometimes even news outlets seem like they aren't trustworthy anymore. Where would you recommend we go if we want to find some reliable information?
That is such a great question. I love it, Chloe. Well, come to our website because we are nonpartisan and fact-based. But I'll tell you what I do, or what I aspire to do, because I don't always have time for it, is I look at the same news story from a couple of different news sources, and news sources that I know or I believe take different angles on the same story. And what I think is fascinating is that you can take the same set of facts and present very different narratives around what is happening or what has happened. And I think it's really hard to figure out what those underlying facts are. I mean, that's a lot of what we do, but we issue 50-page reports that are very dense and not easy to digest on social media. But I think if you can triangulate the news stories, then maybe you can get to the core set of facts that maybe are true without somebody else's spin, and then you can decide what you think is. That's what I would suggest, but that takes time and it takes diligence, and those are things that are both in short supply. So I get it.
Great question, Chloe. Ted, you wanted to go second. I'm giving you a chance to go second.
Sure. I think there's a tendency, and I've seen this sense this a little bit looking at what I've read and heard about the OLA and the Legislative Auditor, that when we see some kind of something not working right, some kind of misbehavior, the initial tendency is to get people to tell people to do it right, either by law or by administration, or with advice, which in a sense is what you produce as advice rather than commands, right? But thinking back over my career, I think there's one thing I've come to see and think is important, and that is that regulation does not and cannot overcome the effects of bad design. And I don't care whether you're talking about I could give you an example about a piece of freeway, a piece of street that I drive fairly regularly near here, but it also applies to organizations. And so my question is really whether you see situations in Minnesota where it is the organizational and institutional design that is fundamentally responsible for the low levels of performance. While you're thinking about this, let me give you an example that I came across. It's not a Minnesota example, but it was so powerful that I immediately committed it to memory. It was in the Summers book about Medicare, when Medicare was first created in 1967, I think. And they wrote that in no other realm of economic life is repayment guaranteed for costs that are neither controlled by competition nor regulated by public authority, and in which no incentive for economy can be discerned. That was the design of Medicare. And there was a long history in which particularly Paul Elwood in Minnesota was involved in trying to redesign that program so that in addition to being effective, it would also be more cost effective. So that's kind of my question. Do we have situations like that around here now? And if so, where are they?
Well, I can only speak to the things we've looked at, right? So they could exist in lots of other places as well, but I would say absolutely they exist in state government. And one thing I think I want to just do is back up just for a second and talk about the different types of work that OLA does, because depending on which type of work we do, we would identify those design issues as opposed to regulation issues. So we conduct financial audits, we conduct program evaluations, and we conduct special reviews. And I'm going to just go on a little detour for a second. I promise you it'll be worth it, but it'll help the discussion. And my new favorite metaphor for explaining the differences of what we do is thinking about a barn And our financial auditors, when they conduct performance audits, they're looking at internal controls and compliance. So that's more the regulation types of stuff. The regulation says this, do this. And so it's like going to the barn and walking around the outside and like jiggling the lock and saying, the hinge is kind of rusty, we should fix that. And like, oh, I see up on the roof, the shingles are kind of, it might be time to replace the roof. And oh, look, this window's wide open, right? So it's kind of the maintenance stuff. Our program evaluators go inside the barn. And this, I think, is getting to the design question. They go inside the barn and they say, well, there's a horse here and you're feeding the horse. But like, I thought we wanted a racehorse, and the food you're giving, the hay or the oats, that's not what we need for a racehorse. We need a better design, right? And so they'll also say, oh, look, the roof is leaking. We should fix that, a little bit of regulation, but it's going to be more looking holistically, more at the design. And then our special reviews are the next morning, the farmhand comes into the barn, opens the door, the horse is gone. Oh my gosh, where did the horse go? Right? So that's special reviews, like there's a specific allegation of something went wrong. Okay, so those are the three different things we do. So the question that you're asking, Ted, makes me think a lot about our program evaluations, where we're looking more at program design.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Can you give us an example?
I'm going to. I just wanted to make sure everybody's on the same page. So one that's older that we worked on was related to teacher licensure. And I'm not sure if you remember that one, Ted. But when we did the program evaluation, oh gosh, now 10 plus years ago, more than 10 years ago, it was a place where when teachers who had been licensed in out of state would be moving to Minnesota, and they would have a heck of a time getting licensed. It wouldn't transfer. The statutes themselves were so confusing. There were terms that weren't defined. The same term could be used to mean 3 different types of teacher licensure. It was it was a mess, and it needed a big overhaul, which is a lot of work for the legislature to do, right? But we dug in and we looked at it, and we did all sorts of work. But one of the things we recommended, and you're right, we don't have the authority to require, we just make recommendations, was to overhaul the teacher licensure system. And we went and looked at other systems that were used in other states, and identified a tiered licensing approach that was kind of much simpler that several states were using, and we recommended that as an option. And then the legislature at that time kind of took up our report and spent really a lot of time and effort to really overhaul the teacher licensure system. So it was a whole redesign, using your words, of that system. Now, is the current teacher licensure system perfect? Probably not. Is it better than what it was? I hope so. But so that's one example. Another example, and it's something that we see now that I think is a current problem, is related to how the state handles grants. We've done a lot of work related to grants management, and we have seen a lot of problems in how the state is managing grants. And we keep trying to dig in to figure out why. Like, why isn't this going better? And one of the things that we have learned as we've talked to people who manage grants is that the people who manage grants often, now generalizations are always dangerous, but just go with me. We've been looking at grant management in the Department of Human Services. A lot of people who want to work in the Department of Human Services managing grants are interested in the programmatic aspects of it, right? They're interested in, yes, I'd like to work with the program staff who are doing the recovery services, they're interested in those things. They are not interested in conducting the financial reconciliation of a reimbursement request, right? That's not why they went into DHS grant management, but that's part of their job. And in fact, we surveyed them and in a division, and the vast majority of those who had conducted financial reconciliations, I'll flip it around. Only 20% of the people we surveyed who had conducted financial reconciliations had confidence that they knew what they were doing, that they understood how to do financial reconciliations. So we have a mismatch here of the skills that people have, and frankly, probably their interests, and what we're asking them to do. That to me is an issue of a design failure, right? It's these people who they hired are great, probably at the program aspects of it, but we're asking them to do things they're not skilled to do, they're not trained to do, they're probably not interested in doing. And so I think we need to rethink how we're handling grants in agencies, right? Why are we having the program staff do it? Why don't we have financial folks do the financial reconciliation? So, and it's hard to unwind things, and it's hard to, it's the plane is in midair and we're overseeing grants, and then we're going to suggest pulling it and moving it and changing who's responsible. It's a hard lift. I get it. But that's one example, Ted, that I see currently where I think things aren't designed properly.
If we could have time, we talk to Paul about the Minneapolis towing contract, but we won't get into that today. That's perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Yes, exactly. So I want to call on Lee next. But just to clarify, and maybe a question if I could jump in on one, do you have any authority you can't require the legislature to even vote on what you recommend, right? And if the answer to that is no, is there any state where a legislative auditor actually has, to your knowledge, the authority to essentially submit something to the legislature that they have to act on?
Oh gosh, Paul, I wish. That would be so. No, you're correct that we do not have any authority to require anything. All right. Well, that's not true. We have the authority to require public officials to cooperate with us and to provide us information and things like that. But in terms of implementing recommendations, they are simply recommendations to the agency, to a legislature. We can't introduce a bill, none of that. There have been past audit commission members who have said, I'm going to introduce a bill that contains all the recommendations OLA makes, whether or not I agree with it, just so that it gets a hearing. That hasn't happened for a long time now, but I can recall some members who did that, but no. And I don't know of other states where the legislative auditor has that type of authority.
Okay. Lee.
So I want to approach this from two perspectives, from my own experience. First of all, I'm really a big fan of the Legislative Auditor's Office, and I think Martin Sabo and his colleagues who put this together in the 70s really did a great service, and over the years has made a big difference. I was on the Minneapolis City Council in the 1970s, and we reorganized the committee structure and created a government operations committee, which was supposed to look into government operations. And I was the chair. I'd actually worked part-time as a garbage truck driver when I was while I was in college. My dad was a city employee, and he kept telling me about these jobs I could get in the city. And so I drove, and I remember that we spent like 2 hours doing the route, and then the 6 hours we just wasted time. And it really bothered me that, why weren't we working, the full 8 hours, why weren't the routes? So I asked the question, committee, and, the public works director kind of fumbled around and, didn't. And then I went on to other political stuff that I was dealing with. And the problem was I didn't have like an auditor that I could go to say, could you investigate, are we really getting the most out of this? Now, I'm sure I would have uncovered all kinds of union problems and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter that, and the government ops committee, I don't think existed much longer after I left the city council, because part of the problem is that people who are in legislative, now they created an audit office. I'm not sure it really compares in the city of Minneapolis. I don't think it really compares with what the legislative auditor does, and I don't know if they've really, under the reorganization, whether they've done that. But the second thing, fast forward to the 1980s, I'm hired as assistant commissioner in the Department of what was then Energy and Economic Development, primarily to focus on the economic development stuff. And it was, around 85, and it was kind of 2 years into the Perpich administration, and they created all these economic development programs. And so the Legislative Auditor's Office was asked to, look at you know, the measurement, you know, if you're giving grants out to businesses or communities, you're supposed to create jobs that otherwise wouldn't be there, you know. So there was all kinds of problems about the counting of jobs and things like that. And my commissioner, Mark Dayton, at the time was kind of threatened by this, and he wasn't really happy about this legislative audit report. It didn't bring up any fraud or anything like that. But one of the things it did do was taking over this new policy or this policy analysis office that had existed, but I came into it like 2 years after the previous one person left. You know, in this report, they said these are some things that you could do and recommended what the policy analysis office could do in order to do that. And we took that. I marked up the report and I used that to develop tools like displacement analysis. You know, if you bring in economic development, if you fund a program, you're not supposed to displace jobs from one part of the state to another. You can displace jobs from Wisconsin, but you can't displace them within the state. You know, so we came up with tools to kind of be able to do that and kind of help the department improve the way in which they did it. And the people, you know, the legislature creates new programs and they're well-intentioned, but then somebody has to implement them. And when the implementation, I think getting to Ted's point about kind of the design is you know, sometimes there's not enough sort of accountability that's built into the design of these programs. And when programs start really fast, you know, you just got to, sometimes it's just like, we got to get the money out, you know. And so you need something like the Legislative Auditor's Office to be able to kind of check that. And it's not always about uncovering fraud. A lot of times it may be just being able to come in and saying, maybe you ought to correct the design. And we, you know, got involved in developing better evaluation tools and things like that. Now, we still wasn't perfect. I mean, these programs still weren't, you know, but the Legislative Auditor's Office, at least in that case, played an important role. And I think it still does today. So I just, you know, I don't know, Judy, if you want to comment on that, this was before your time, I think,
Yeah,
though.
it sounds like maybe it was.
Yeah, and can I add on to that and then answer Lee's question?
Yeah.
So I'm curious whether the legislative auditor ever gets involved in the initial program design. Because I think that's one of the things you bring up, Lee, is that get the money out the door, you know, start the program. What about the front end? Is there any role for you there? But that's just one part of what Lee was asking about.
Great, thanks. So first, Lee, that's like a success story. I love hearing stories like that because that is really the spirit in which our work is intended, right? We deliver our reports. It's not supposed to be punitive, right? They're supposed to be helpful to everybody, to the agency in terms of ideas for implementation, to the legislature in terms of policy design and making tweaks, and then again to the public. And so I love hearing stories like that. And we do hear those, you know, periodically, you know, a couple times a year, I think a couple reports a year where an agency really, you know, takes the report and runs with it. And it's like, okay, this is really helpful. We hear that a lot when there's somebody new who comes in, right? Whether it's a turnover administration or even just a new assistant commissioner or a new program director, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is a roadmap, right? Like, this is amazing. You know, we did an audit a year and a half ago of the state auditor. We audit the constitutional offices, and we did an audit of the state auditor's office. And one of the things we did was an IT audit of their office, and that we had never done that before. And they were kind of just on the brink of realizing that they needed to do a better job with their IT oversight. And they were just like putting together the posting to hire an IT director that they didn't really have. And so, you know, Julie Blaha was like, this is amazing. Like, I'm going to hire our IT director and hand them this report, right? Because this is exactly what we need to do. And it was like free consulting for us, right? We could have paid a consulting firm to come in and do this. Instead, you did. And this is really helpful. So, you know, it's great that you did it that way too, Lee. And we do hear that sometimes we don't, right? And sometimes, agencies are defensive, or they say that's great, but we need money to do that. And sometimes that is fair.
But it's kind of a follow-up. Does the legislature then, I mean, you have a committee that these reports go to. Do they use that sometimes to improve the legislation? I mean, does that happen? We did it internally, but I'm just wondering whether that happens very often.
It does. It definitely happens. Especially so our reports will make recommendations to agencies or to the legislature. Some reports are more like the recommendations are to the agency and the law seems mostly okay. But when we have kind of these big recommendations to the legislature for overhauling teacher licensure, or even smaller sections of law, we had one a couple of years ago on sustainable building guidelines, and we had a lot of recommendations to the legislature. One of them was decide which entity should be responsible for this, right? Like pretty basic stuff. That's a design flaw, right? Who do you want to be responsible for this? And this kind of loops into Paul's question too. In those times when a legislator really kind of digs into it, they may meet with us. They often will meet with us to talk through our recommendation, to understand what we're recommending. Sometimes they'll draft language and ask us to look at it. And in those cases, we're there as a resource. We're there if they want to talk to us, but we don't really push it, And so it's also a tricky role as an auditor, because you have to stay independent. And so there's been times where a commissioner will say, okay, you made these recommendations. If I do this and this and this, is that good? And like, we can't do that piece of it. We can't like sanction something, because we need to reserve the right to come back and audit it again and say there's a problem or not. And so they can't be like, well, you said if we did this, it would be okay. And so I don't like that part of the job, because it feels kind of like we're not going to help you. Like we did all this work and we told you, but now, our hands are clean. But that's just the nature of our work. But
you do give the department an opportunity to review the report before you
absolutely
bring it, and sometimes they may have things that could be that you might reference in the report. I mean, it's not that you're approving it, but if there's a correction or something like that.
Absolutely. And that is before we release the report. You're right. That's just a part of it's a standard part of an audit or evaluation, where we've done all our work, we have our draft report, and then we give it to the agency for them to review and comment on. And, they'll tell us we got something wrong, or they'll say, I didn't know you wanted that data. Oh, wait, we do have that. It's all, that's always the worst. But sometimes, we will talk with them and incorporate feedback to the extent we agree with it and can support it. And I always say some of our best ideas are from, the program staff who are working in this area, who are experts in it, who are dealing with the kind of the daily hassles, and maybe don't have the ability to elevate their concerns. And so oftentimes we get great ideas from folks within the agency.
That's great. Helen.
Thanks, Paul. I was just jumping for my unmute button there. Thanks, Judy. So I'm just one thing especially that struck me from what you've said so far was your example of how the program managers often, they weren't the financial folks, right? And that there was a skills mismatch that was happening there. So I'm thinking also about my question is really like, what are the other systemic vulnerabilities that you see that may have caused some of either the scandals that are currently making headlines, or else just the day-to-day things that you examine in the legislator's office. And I'm also thinking of, I saw you mention as well that, your office received fraudulent documentation when you had done audits as well, right? So your office has been looking into these things and trying to get the word out, but then at the same time, you're getting, and I, you know, I work in education. We're looking at the effects of generative AI now as well. So I'm curious too, if that's a concern you have when a lot of this work is done, you know, digitally passing documentation back and forth. And I'm interested both in, so this, like, what are these vulnerabilities, as well as any recommendations, suggestions, like, what do you think could be done better and what should we prevent against as well? Yeah.
Just a few small questions there, Helen, right?
So sorry. This was like my brain had about 12 questions, so answer it however you wish.
Well, I appreciate it, and they're all good questions. Okay, so in terms of systemic vulnerabilities, I think one of the things that we have seen in the last couple of years, I would say, is not attention to the small, like a lack of attention to the small stuff, just the boring details that matter. I know that's very vague and simplistic, but you know, I spent a lot of time thinking about internal controls, which are pretty boring because everybody, it's just like the air you breathe, right? You don't even think about it. Like, of course you should know who's responsible for a program or checking the debt that a provider owes. And of course we should have two people sign off on big expenses. And of course we shouldn't have the person who can order the computer, receive the computer, pay for the computer, dispose of the computer, have all of that be one person, right? Like, these are all things that are just things that we would expect to happen, right? Like, these are just normal parts of being a government agency and being careful with other people's money, right? I mean, it's what you would do with your own money. You would certainly do it with somebody else's money. And I think a lack of, I don't know what it is, care about it, attention to it, thinking that it's important. They're not hard to do. You know, the things that we see missing that we think are creating these systemic vulnerabilities are not hard to do. And they're not rocket science. But over and over again, we keep seeing them not happening. And they create opportunity for bad actors. And that's what it all comes down to, is not creating those opportunities. I'm not going to get rid of all fraud. I mean, if a bunch of bad actors want to collude and are really savvy, they might get away with it. But like we should at least be taking the easy steps, and we just haven't been. And I can get more into that if we want. The fraudulent documentation that you mentioned, this was something that was pretty shocking to me, honestly. This happened, we released a report January 6th, I think it's around that. I mean, time this month, right, has been a year, right? So I don't know, but it was sometime in early January, we released a report regarding behavioral health administration grants. It's a administration within the Department of Human Services, and we found a large number of problems. But one of the things that the auditors uncovered as they were doing their work was that the agency staff were creating documents in response to the audit. So let me just back up. We pulled a sample of grants that we were going to look at. We had access to the grant system. So our auditors go in, they're pulling the documents they need for the grants we selected. Some documents were missing. This happens. So we reach out to the grant managers and we say, hey, we need document X for grantee 1. We need documents B and C for grantee 2, etc. A week later, you know, they follow up and they're like, oh, they're in the system. Interesting, they hadn't been there before. Okay, so they go to look at them and they see, for example, for one of the documents, the system has like an activity log, and it says the document was created May 23rd of 2025. And then when it says, you know, when the document was dated, like created in they enter in the date they created the document, something, something 2023. Right. And like, we just know that's not true. They just backdated the document. There were other sets of and they actually went and talked to the grant manager and they said, help us understand what's going on. And they said, oh yeah, I created it. I just made it. I just entered it and didn't have it before. So admitted to it, but they didn't. I mean, the way to handle that, if we're conducting an audit and we ask for documents and you don't have them, you say, we don't have them, right? If you have them on like a notepad that you hadn't like entered it into the system, you say, I have it on a notepad. I never wrote it up. Would you like me to write it up? Would you like my notes? How would you like that handled? Right? Or I saved it in my email. I'm not supposed to do that. Do you want, people are people, we get it. We'll take it however it is, but we want it to be authentic, right? We had another set of documents where I think it was related to progress reports, and the grant managers would enter in the date they received the progress report, which matters based on, it affects when you can pay them. Okay, so it matters. We have fabulous auditors, and for some reason they didn't trust it. So they went to the grantees and said, give us the evidence, show us when you submitted your progress report, show us the email. So we got from the grantees the actual, email saying, here is my progress report. And it was different by several months, which for several of them, which again affects payment, affects compliance. So it was across many different grant managers, across many different stages of the grant process, and in many different ways of doing it, right? And I mean, it's just unacceptable, right? Like there's no other word for it. It's just unacceptable.
I call it scandalous.
You might call it scandalous for sure. I mean, I think I said it was the most egregious thing I've seen, which I wish I hadn't said, because then that got quoted and, whatever. But it was really unbelievable. And for many reasons, right? One, it undermines the ability for us to do our work. In law, public officials are required to cooperate with us, right? I mean, one, there's just the you just don't do that moral stuff. Two, it undermines our ability to do our job. Three, it means the agency doesn't have a clear sense of its weaknesses or its vulnerabilities, and therefore it doesn't have an opportunity to fix it, right? I mean, our report, back to what Lee was saying, right? It identifies opportunities for improvement, and when taken in the spirit in which it's intended, the agency can then make improvements, right? And do better, which is what we all want, right? We all want government to do better and do a better job delivering the services. And so if staff are ultimately undermining the audit, but undermining themselves and their own ability to do the program well. So that's what happened. I mean, we made quite a statement about it at the hearing because it was so outrageous. Legislators were really upset about it, which, I appreciated. And there's definitely been talk about changing some laws to try to beef up penalties associated with it. There are some investigations going on internally at the department, HR investigations and stuff. So we still are learning more about how that happened. Finally, AI. I don't know if you, I will say I'm concerned about AI. We talk about it a lot. We have rules on how we can use it. I'm very concerned about auditing programs that use AI because, who's responsible, right? How do you do accountability? How do you do transparency if there's inputs, it goes into a black box and out pops a decision, right? We need to be able to look inside that black box. And so, I'm very focused on making sure that there are people who are making final decisions, who are responsible, who have policies about how they make those decisions. How much do you rely on AI? Maybe you can rely on it for a first draft of something, but you'd have to double check every single thing. I've heard too many horror stories about hallucinations, where they make up medical conditions, they make up case law, they make whole cloth, a citation and everything. And so our office certainly isn't ready to rely on it for anything of importance. And, I'm really hoping agencies are very careful with it as well. I think I covered all the questions, but let me know.
No, that was great.
That was
Thank you.
phenomenal. So, Judy, I want to open this up to everyone now. But how does this? I promised we wouldn't ask you political questions, and then I don't intend this to be a political question. Um, but how do you navigate? I see you as a good government person that doesn't wear a partisan hat. But as soon as these issues come up, and I'm going to make this agnostic. Obviously, if it's a Democratic administration, the Republicans are, and vice versa. Two can play that game, right? So there's the gotcha piece of it. How do you, or even do you, navigate that?
It's really hard. It's really hard because we see our reports getting misused by both sides all the time. And I see it more now than I did 10 years ago, for sure. What I do and what I talk to the staff about and the team is, we are here to do a job, right? And our job is to make sure that the reports we issue are accurate, objective, useful, based on the facts. We verify every single word in all of our reports. We double check, we do all of that. And we try to write our reports very carefully, right? But there's nothing to stop somebody from taking out one little piece or from misinterpreting intentionally or otherwise. And I think just understanding where our role is, we're providing the information, it's available to everybody. And then, I don't know, hope for the best. And then if I get asked, trying to be really clear and, right down the middle. But it's hard. And there was a time, there's a story that Jim Nobles used to tell where the chair of the audit commission was the same party as the governor at that time. And that chair called in Jim and said, my caucus is having a really hard time because you keep criticizing the governor, right? Which was the same party. And Jim was like, well, here's the solution. Lose the governorship, right? Then you won't have to worry about it, right? Because that was the thing. Like, we don't care what party anybody is. It's irrelevant, right? We're just doing independent looks at executive branch, judicial branch, Met Council. I mean, we look at all sorts of things and just want to make government work better. And to me, that's not partisan, right? I think we should all want to do that regardless of who's in the executive branch and regardless of which caucus you're in. We all just want it to work. And work as well as it can, whether it needs a new design or whether it needs better implementation. So, but it's a struggle, Paul. So, thanks for the question.
Hallelujah to everything you just said. Very good. So now we can open it up to any of our panelists with any additional questions you have. And I think we'll save just a few minutes at the end, just for folks to maybe reflect a little bit on what we've learned. But who wants to jump in with another question?
Well, government is known for bureaucracy and for taking too long to get things done, whereas businesses, kind of, act quickly. We always, one of the problems with our economic development programs is that, they weren't even always fast enough, so a business, if we're dealing with a business, they want a decision within 6 months, well, it didn't always go that way. So on the one hand, government is under pressure, to sort of get the money out the door, so to speak, depending on what the program is, and get the job done. And, you have a lot of civil servants who, believe in what they're doing, and I worked in government all my life, and I, believe there's a lot of really talented people. But somehow or another, are there better ways of having solutions within the department to be able to deal with this ahead of time? You mentioned things like, 2 people handling money at the same. I mean, in my church, we had several years ago, we had a woman who was responsible for handling all the money, and she ended up stealing about $40,000 from the church, and the the auditors came in and said, well, two people, anytime there's money, there should be two people, with the money, so it happens in churches, and it may be happening in businesses too, although they don't publicize what's going on. So, I mean, all institutions are vulnerable to misuse, whether it's fraud or whether it's incompetence or whatever. Are there some kind of general rules that every department should have, and should they have, kind of like an internal auditor? And I guess you do have fiscal staff who are supposed to keep track of those things, but they're so I'm just wondering if there are some general design issues that that might be able to prevent things from like this from happening, and when you get deep into it, and then the people who are the politicians who are in the legislature and the government, I mean, they're not dealing with the day-to-day issues going on. So they hire somebody and they expect that they're going to do it, and commissioners aren't always, great managers and things like that. And so they need someone else, and so
Well, I'd like to comment about that if there's time.
So let's ask Judy.
so anyway,
let's have Judy respond to that.
After Judy.
Let's have Judy respond to the question, then we'll let Ted jump in. I think what I'm hearing, maybe forgive me for trying to paraphrase a little bit, is the departments themselves. What are their internal controls? And perhaps your question went beyond that too, Lee. But how might you assist different departments with strengthening their own internal controls?
Sure. It's a great question, and it's really important. The Minnesota Management and Budget, which is, it used to be finance and employee relations, and now it's one big agency. They have an internal controls unit that helps develop policies for all state agencies. So there are actually really robust internal control policies that all agencies are supposed to follow. And all agencies are supposed to have their own kind of more specific policies and procedures to do it. So the truth is, a lot of times when we go in, the policies are in place, the laws are in place. It's really about the implementation of doing it. The big agencies have internal auditors, but it's not the most robustly staffed group, I would say, and some of them are more robust than others, I guess I would say.
Well,
So that framework is in place. It's just doing it.
Yeah,
I'd say I'd come back to what we were talking about earlier. See, it maybe is more of a design problem. I'm more and more as I listen to all this, I'm thinking how much you could learn from the state auditor, from local government, because the design in local government is fundamentally different, I think, than in the state government. And you're handicapped by the bureaucracy of the state government. But the local governments, especially the counties, do a lot of contracting, and so do municipalities. And so they have the option, they have choices. And if a program in the county or the city is not working well, I think about Hennepin County and child daycare some years ago, for example. They have the options they have a way to go to different designs for this. And I'd really I'd love to see you do an analysis of this. It comes back to what I like from Walter McClure. See, if organizations aren't behaving the way you'd like them to behave, they tend to behave the way they're structured and rewarded to behave. And if you don't like the way they're behaving, you probably ought to change the way they're structured and rewarded. And in the cities and counties, their rewards, the sanctions are incentives. You could lose the job you're doing. Your organization could lose its work if you don't do it to satisfaction. I don't think you have that opportunity in the state level. Why don't you get it is there a way to get it for yourself, for state agencies, not for yourself?
Well, it's an interesting, it's a good thought, Ted. I'll have to think about it. There's a lot, you're right, there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of unions and things like
You're sort of committed to passing rules and using regulations, and you don't have incentives to work with.
Yeah.
Well, that's a subject for another discussion, Paul.
No, and that comes back to implementation and accountability too, right, Judy? What's the accountability? I think that's what you're speaking to, Ted. If you don't implement it, what's the penalty? And if there isn't one,
losing your assignment is a strong accountability.
Yeah. So we want to give our young leaders the last shot at a question, and then maybe people have a quick comment or two. We can go to that too. So Helen and Chloe, do you have any last question that Chloe, we started with you. Any question that comes to your mind from the conversation we've had?
Yeah, I'll try to make mine quick, but I know we started off, I know you talked about kind of how you hope there was still trust in institutions. And then throughout this whole discussion, I've been hearing about things like skills mismatches and backdating. So my question is, aside from restoring accountability and credibility through your auditing, how do you keep trust in institutions or restore trust if it's already been lost?
Good question at the conclusion here.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's tough. I think one way to maintain trust is, and it's something Lee mentioned too, is there are so many really excellent state employees who are really dedicated to what they're doing, who care deeply, who are knowledgeable, who work hard. I mean, every time I have gone into a program from back when I started in 1998 through now, I mean, I meet with and encounter people who are just really committed to what they're doing. And I think that gives me a lot of trust. And I think it should give everybody a lot of trust that kind of the fabric of these programs and agencies are really good. That's not to say there aren't challenges, because there are. But I feel like that's a reason to be hopeful. I think we have some work to do as a state, to kind of get back to where we all thought we were. I'm not Minnesotan by birth, but I've lived here long enough that I feel the pride in Minnesota as a good governance state. And I think we haven't felt that maybe for the last couple of years. And so, I think we do have some tough conversations to have as a state and maybe some tough decisions to make. We're going to have to make some changes. But I really do think that that at the end of the day, the people who we're going to need to implement those changes are there and are committed. So that's my hope. That's my hope. And that's where I would give that to you, Chloe, as a reason to be hopeful.
That's great. Helen?
Gosh. That was such a closing note. I don't want to open us back up. But I would be interested just in other opportunities you see, other like if you could make certain changes either to your own office and its function or to those of the groups that you audit and investigate and examine. What would you change?
Oh my gosh, right? And we're out of time, and that's a big one. I honestly, I think what I would change is just a general attitude about I think there's a real feeling of adversity, adversarialness, not a word, I know, terrible. But I just wish we were all more cooperative and collaborative, because I really do think, I, as nonpartisan legislative auditor, work for House and Senate. I work for all 201 legislators, right? And they're all very different from each other, but every person I have met with has a genuine desire to make things better, right? Now, they might have different ideas on how to get there, but they all want the same thing. And when I go talk to state agency folks, they want their program to work. They want the service to be effective. I mean, I feel like I have a really unique opportunity to have really candid conversations with lots of different people, right? All the different legislators, state agency, program staff to commissioners. And everybody's working really hard to make things better. Yet they look across the aisle or they look across the table and they think that the person there is working against them. And I don't know. It's not my experience. It's not my experience when I really have those conversations. And so maybe the hope is just to have some more real conversations and get back to a place where we all realize that we're all working together and we all want the same thing. That's kind of a corny whatever, but that's really what I wish we could do, because I think that alone would probably make the biggest difference.
That's fantastic. Well, Judy, you're a problem solver, and that's what we need. We need problem solvers, and we don't have enough of them. But you are one of them, and you're a public servant in every sense of that word. And I see people like Chloe and Helen, you too, perhaps, but going into public service for the right reason to make government work. How do we make that sexy again, right? That's my question for you. How do you make that something that people get excited about, to just get under the hood and make things work?
Well, I don't know if it'll ever be sexy, but I do think the younger generations, really care about wanting to make things better. And so my hope is that they see it as an opportunity, right? To not just talk the talk, but actually walk the walk and get in there and do some of those hard things to actually, be the change you want to see, right? Make it work the way you want it to work. So I don't know, maybe just more people, talking positively about it, reaching across the aisle, the proverbial, not just Republican, Democrat, but whatever the different interests are, and finding that common ground. I don't know.
What could any of us do to help you to get the word out? We'll be sending this to our 8,000 folks that get our emails, because I think your message here is a really important one for people to hear, especially in this time where we're living through, which is so difficult, and people want solutions. What might we be able to do, not just us here and the public in general? What if someone's watching this and they want to, I know you're not looking for publicity personally, but they want what the OLA stands for to be better known and to grow. What could someone watching this program do?
I think read the newspaper, read multiple different newspapers, Chloe, right? So you get different viewpoints, ask questions, speak to your legislators, vote, just be engaged, be involved, be an educated citizen, I think is the main thing. And look for sources that are credible and honest and genuine.
Yeah,
and
like
challenge those that aren't. Yeah, like the OLA, and then challenge those that aren't, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well, on behalf of all of us, Judy, we want to thank you so much for
thank you.
spending tonight with us.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate all the questions.
Good luck with all the wonderful work you're doing.
Thank you.